Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Zooming into Scripture. So, today it's incredibly common to hear from skeptics of the Bible that the Gospels were written anonymously and the true authors are unknown. But is this claim backed up with any good evidence? This video is my second in this series, with the first covering the authorship of Matthew. So, after this video, make sure to go check out to discover my findings. I'm going to do these videos in the order in which they appear in the Bible, and I have a playlist on my channel so you can easily find which gospel you'd like to know more about. So let's get into the evidence surrounding the authorship of Mark. We will first look at the external evidence, followed by some internal evidence, before summarizing what we have found and whether the evidence points to Mark being the author, someone else, or if we really can't know who the author is. Now let's get to our potential candidates for authorship. Now I'm going to spare you guys the cheesy drum roll of the last video and just mention right off the bat there are no competing names out there for Mark's authorship. The only candidate we have besides John Mark is just anonymous authorship. But where does the evidence point? Because it could still point to anonymous considering the evidence. But let's go and look at some more evidence about our only candidate first before getting to some external evidence. So we know from Acts 12:12 through 17 that Mark was the son of a widow named Mary and that the disciples met in her home. He was also the cousin of Barnabas, mentioned in Colossians 4:10, and accompanied him and Paul for a time. That's all I will have on Mark for now, as I want to give you guys a brief introduction and more details will be revealed during our external and internal breakdown. So let's start with the external evidence. Despite what many atheist and skeptical comments online will say, the manuscript evidence shows that there exist no anonymous copies of the Gospels. That's any of them. Historian Craig Evans states this: in every single text that we have where the beginning or the ending of the work survives, we find the traditional authorship. He goes on to say that there are no anonymous copies of the Gospels, and there are no copies of the canonical Gospels under different names. Unless evidence to the contrary should surface, we should stop talking about anonymous Gospels. But what did the early sources say? Papias of Hierapolis, he lived from 60 to 130 AD, writes this: and the presbyter said this: Mark, having become the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately whatsoever he remembered. It was not, however, in exact order that he related the sayings or deeds of Christ, for he neither heard the Lord nor accompanied him. But afterwards, as I said, he accompanied Peter, who accommodated his instructions to the necessities of his hearers, but with no intention of giving a regular narrative of the Lord's sayings. Wherefore, Mark made no mistake in thus writing some of the things he remembered as he remembered them. For one thing, he took special care not to omit anything he had heard and not to put anything fictitious into the statements. And we also have Irenaeus, who lived from 130 to 200 AD, writing, after their departure, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, did also hand down to us in writing what he had been preached by Peter. And I want to add in a quote from Mark L. Struss, and I'm going to throw in a picture of the website that I got this from here so you can go check it out. He writes this: other early church writers, including Tertullian, Eusebius, and Jerome, affirm Mark's role as author and that he was dependent on the eyewitness accounts of Peter. End quote. The early church fathers left the authorship of Mark uncontested, and it's important to consider this fact. Mark was not a disciple of Jesus, and his name did not carry the same weight as that Peter would have. It would seem the early church cared more about accuracy, as having a relatively unknown person authoring one of the four synoptic gospels wouldn't make much sense otherwise. The external evidence strongly supports Mark as being the author, with no other candidates and no claims of anonymous authorship among the manuscripts or early sources. But let's consider some of the internal evidence as well before making any decisions. Internal evidence unfortunately gives few clues to the identity of the author, but a couple things stand out. I'm going to use another quote from Mark Strauss, which gives a great explanation covering the internal evidence. Although internal evidence does not provide direct evidence of authorship, it can be used to help corroborate the external claims. 1. The author's many Aramaisms are compatible with a Palestinian Jew like John Mark. 2. The large number of Latinisms would also fit a Roman provenance, place of origin. The identification of Rufus and Alexander as sons of Simon of Cyrene is also significant since it confirms that the author was known to his readers. It seems unlikely that the title, according to Mark, could have been attached to the gospel so early if the original readers knew it came from someone else. Furthermore, if this Rufus is the same one mentioned in Romans 16:13, we have incidental confirmation of a Roman origin. While these clues alone wouldn't be enough to place Mark as the author, they do point to an author with Roman audience in mind who also directly or indirectly knew Peter. Of the possible candidates, traditional authorship seems to fit best. So let's summarize the evidence and see where the evidence points. So first, all manuscripts with a beginning or ending intact has traditional authorship. 2. Early church fathers unanimously attribute the gospel to Mark, with no anonymous copies found. 3. Having an author that wasn't a disciple or other big name indicates the accuracy was most important. 4. Though internal clues are few, they do corroborate the external evidence, as mentioned. The evidence strongly points to Mark indeed being the author of Mark. There isn't any good reason to believe otherwise. And again, it would be going contrary to the evidence instead of because of it. I'm going to conclude with a quote from crossexamine.org, which sums up the evidence perfectly. From the evidences considered, John Mark is the only clear candidate for the second gospel. While John Mark was not a primary witness of the life of Jesus of Nazareth, and while he does not necessarily record the events of Jesus' life in chronological order, he does act as a scribe, or amanuensis, to Peter, whom Jesus knew and selected to be an inner circle disciple. We have great testimony preserved for us in the second gospel. I believe we truly have the eyewitness accounts of Simon Peter documented for us by his good friend John Mark. End quote. Well, that's going to wrap up this video. If you found it interesting or learned something new, make sure to like and subscribe. And as mentioned before, I will have the authorship of Luke and John coming up next, and I have a playlist on my channel that, as of the time of recording, will have this video and the book authorship of Matthew in it. If you're new to this channel, I upload every week on various Christian apologetic subjects and diving into scripture. So if you're into that kind of thing, I hope you check out my other videos. But otherwise, I will see you guys next time.